do author interviews at Amazon. This afternoon, I'm very happy to sit down with Jeanette Winterson, who is the award-winning author of novels, my particular favorite being Art and Lies, poetry, film and stage adaptations, essays, and now a new memoir with a poignant title, Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal. Welcome, Jeanette. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Is it harder to write your own life than to invent someone else's?
Certainly not. Also, I don't call this a memoir or an autobiography.
Okay,
I kind of call it a cover version.
Okay.
Because it's always a cover version, isn't it? I mean, one of the interesting things about being a writer and about getting older is that you realise that when you revisit the past, it's not the same past. And you know, the hot topic in neuroscience this summer, watch out for it, is going to be that when we have a memory, we don't go back to a fixed point. The memory is like a cluster which releases different things depending on the time when we go back to it. So it's all time dependent or interdependent. It's not that it exists all packed up and we unwrap it. We go there and we interact with that narrative. And when you start writing about your own life, you realise how true that is. It's 25 years have passed since I wrote Orange Is Not the Only Fruit, which is a semi-autobiographical book about my life. 25 years later, I'm looking at Winterson world again, and it feels different.
And you think that each time you go back to one of those memories that you're reinterpreting it?
Certainly, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the facts are the facts, but you know, the facts are always misleading because it's how we understand them. That's what tells us something. And you know, Freud, one of the grand masters of narrative, could never have invented psychoanalysis if you couldn't go back into the past, drag it out, reinterpret it, and allow that to free the present. You know, the past is negotiable.
So was writing this a freeing experience for you, even though it's a cover, if not a memoir?
Yeah, it was. It's an experiment with experience. It was, but I didn't do it for that reason. In fact, I didn't intend to write it at all, because the second part of the book deals with the search for my biological mother, as opposed to the monstrous, scary Mrs. Winterson, who was my adoptive mother. And while I was going through that search, I had to write everything down and chronicle it fairly closely, because I was afraid of forgetting or misremembering in the wrong kind of way. I needed to know what I was doing. So that was happening, and that made me reflect again on the past, on Winterson world. So I started to write this book, not sequentially, I never do, but simultaneously. And so it was almost as if two parallel lines came together and did meet in space, contrary to all possible laws of physics. And then that was the book.
That's a good path.
Yeah.
You write across so many different genres. Are you more drawn to stories or to film or to writing about your own life, depending on what's happening with you personally, or are there outside forces that come into play that say, we would like this from you next?
There's always outside forces, and that's changing. Because I've been working now for more than 25 years, and I started off doing fiction and really nothing but fiction, but gradually that's expanded and it's changed, because we're now living in, you know, a multi-platform, multimedia world where there are so many opportunities, you know, and I don't worry about things like the death of a book or the changes in formats, because everything is a different way of telling a story, and a different means to doing that. And if you're excited by communication, by imagination, by how we open up other people's ideas, then it really doesn't matter what form you use, as long as it works. And by that I mean not whether it's commercially successful, though that's great, but whether it does actually access people's imaginations, whether it turns them on in some way. You know, that's what interests me.
Okay. Let's talk about the title of this book. It's a quote from your adopted mother,
Well,
Mrs.
you think it's very
Winterson.
poignant.
I did,
Which
yeah.
is, I'm rather touched by that. I remember her saying it to me. I mean, I think it's quite funny. Depends, I think, whether you're obviously a romantic and soulful person.
Well, thank you. I didn't know that was obvious. I appreciate that.
Of course, the people just laugh because they just like the title because it's so crazy. And it happened when I was leaving home. I was 16. And I'd had a very religious background. You know, my parents were Pentecostal evangelists, and we had a gospel tent. I thought everybody did, but they don't. And I'd fallen in love with a girl. I don't know whether that was been a permanent situation, because I think sexuality is fluid, like everything else. But I did, and anyway, of course, for evangelicals, that was terrible, because the rule is not just no sex, but certainly no sex with your own sex, so you can imagine. So the idea was either give up the girl or leave home. Well, what would you do?
Right.
So I was packing my bag.
Love always wins.
It should.
Yeah.
And I was going down the hall, and my mother called me back, and I thought, maybe we're going to talk for the first time ever. Maybe we won't be on opposite sides of this glass wall. And she said, Jeanette, will you tell me why you're doing this? And I said, it makes me happy. And there was a pause, and then she said, why be happy when you could be normal? And that's what I took away with me, and I suppose I've worked with that for the rest of my life. I thought, is that a false question? Is it a true binary? Is happy the opposite of normal? If you're one, can you not be the other? So in a sense, because she was a philosopher of a rather violent kind, it was just the sort of thing that was right for a girl like me to take away and to work with and to think about.
And did you have an answer at the time?
No, and I still don't.
You still don't?
No, because it is a false question. You know, it's like it's like one of those crazy political questions where you say, you know, we can't afford to give people unemployment benefit, and you think, well, hold on a minute, we could stop spending 12 billion a year on perfume.
Right.
You know, that's what I mean about it being a false question.
Right.
What will you give up in order to have something else? But happy normal, I think, you know, you work with it all your life. How do you fit in? How do you belong? Everybody wants to be part of a community. You know, we want to feel that people understand us. At the same time, we want to be ourselves, and sometimes that's idiosyncratic, it's eccentric, you know, it doesn't quite fit. So we're always trying to work with that tension of being part of as well as being just us.
In terms of the religious, fairly religious presence of your upbringing, so the Bible played this central role in your reading coming of age, it seemed to me. Your mother read it out loud to you every night. Those stories must have been deeply ingrained. When you write now, do you feel any kind of biblical influence? Do you have any affection for those stories, or is it conscious or unconscious?
I have huge affection for the Bible. I mean, it's got a lot of good stuff in it. You know, I would never just throw it out.
It's a ripping good read.
Yeah, it is, and I'm often astonished. I think, you know, especially the Christian right, I think to them, I think to myself, why don't you just read the Bible and follow the teachings of Jesus? Because, you know, I don't notice Jesus giving tax breaks to the rich. I notice Jesus hanging out with the prostitutes, you know, and the people have fallen off the wagon, not once but many times. So, you know, the Bible is a controversial book, and it is worth reading. But of course, in its rhythms, in its cadences, in its economy, you know, the Bible knows how to tell a story very quickly and very succinctly, get the moral across without being moralizing. And that's really good if you're a writer. So I think everything I've learned comes from those early cadences, and also hearing language out loud. We don't live in a world now where we hear much out loud. Everything just happens rapidly as data passing in front of the eye. And it's very different when you hear something, when you work with the rhythms and cadences of breath. And certainly as a writer, when I write, I'm there tapping away on my apple, but I'm speaking it. I don't write silently. So I'm an out loud kind of a person.
So you have a dedicated room at home where you can sort of
I
shout.
have to. That's why I live in the country. If I lived in the city, I'd be carted away as a mad person. Because, you know, she's talking to herself
Especially
again. You know, hear this woman through the wall tapping and this monologue. But that's how I work.
I was very struck by how great an escape reading is for you. You came back to that many times in the book.
Yeah.
It was a very hard-won victory, though, for you. It sounds like your mother burned your books. And how did reading evolve into the realization that you were meant to write? You call books, fiction and poetry, you call them medicine.
Yeah, they are medicines. I think that they're doses, and that they heal the rupture that reality makes on the imagination. I mean, because everything now in the world is about what happens outside of ourselves. It's all about the outer life, and we never support the inner life, perhaps because religion has fallen away so much, but we do have an inner life, and we all know that we do. And how do we sustain it and nourish it and look after it and protect it? And reading is one really important way of doing that. It's private, it's like lovers' talk, isn't it? It's a one-to-one conversation. Nobody knows what's going on in your head. I mean, that's why reading's so subversive. It's not just what the book contains, it's the fact that nobody can get in your head while you're doing that. No CCTV, no surveillance, no thought police. You know, that's why it's a radical act rather than some passive entertainment, because you know, it's about you thinking for yourself, engaging with a strong text and the voice of another writer. And you know, we need that, you know, because we're in a world which is both very passive as well as being saturated with both noise and data and misinformation. How do we think for ourselves? You know, by reading. It's a really straightforward connection, I think. And so for me, when I was trying to grow up at home, I didn't think of myself as some deprived kid in a terrible situation. I thought of myself as Huck Finn or Aladdin or Heathcliff. And, you know, and books and doors are the same thing. You open them and you go through into another world. And that's what happened to me. You know, that's what saved me. And that's why I say, look, reading's not a luxury. Art's not a luxury. You know, it's about your soul and it's about yourself. And if reading's a luxury, being human's a luxury.
Right. You published your first novel at 23, as you mentioned. Oranges are not the only fruit. And one line that stayed with me strongly from this book is, time is a gap. And you're talking about that in relationship to finding some documents about yourself and about your adoption. How has your writing evolved since you published that first book? Or do you feel that it has?
I think you're meant to tell me that. Of course it has. Anything that you work with over time, constantly, and with the best of you, always evolves. You evolve it and it evolves you. It's a symbiotic process, writing, because books are always smarter than their authors to start with, because something else is pushing through. But it isn't about working just with the top of your head or working with some ideas that you pull in. It's the entirety of the self. So what I am makes the books, not part of me, all of me, and then the books themselves inform the sense of what I am. So the more I can be, then the better the books will be. So there is something to be said for maturing and for developing. And I always say to people who want to write, I say, live life. Don't stand on the rim. Don't sit on the sidelines. Make mistakes. Make a mess. Get it wrong. Read everything and get out and be in life. So that's how I've developed, I guess, just by being there, not by being outside.
By being alive, you change your writing and your writing changes
yes,
you.
and not conforming. Writers are not here to conform. We are here to challenge. We're not here to be comfortable. We're here really to shake things up. That's our job.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to be about the newest hot topic. It doesn't have to be about social realism. But it's always got to be an imaginative challenge. You're trying to make people think differently. So that their brains aren't conforming, so that our minds are free, and that gets harder and harder. So that's what my job is, to keep us free range.
I think that in terms of reading as a rebellious act, I mean, this is not a sentimental book, although
no
and I don't feel that
means.
your novels generally are. But one of the driving forces for your characters, and certainly for you in this story, is love. As well as coming back to reading, you're constantly coming back to love. You say, I never did drugs, I did love.
Yeah.
And in writing relationships, either your own or your characters, how do you separate sentimentality from love? Do you think that you can?
I don't think love is sentimental. I think that there's a pink, soppy, kind of romantic cliche version, very sentimental, which doesn't help anybody, although it can be kind of nice from time to time. No, I think I always think about the rougher energy of love, that love is unsettling. It's the one thing that stops us being selfish. It's the one thing that allows us to actually see another person, whether it's a loved one or a child, instead of just seeing ourselves. It makes us altruistic. It makes us able to sacrifice. It also makes us able to think about something from another person's point of view in a way we find so difficult. So love in itself is a huge challenge to who we are. It just pierces us. When I write about it, I hope that I give people that sense of love in its broad, confrontational style, not in some kind of narrow teddy bear mode.
Yeah,
That's
but
not what I
it
want.
can save as well, though, as reading can.
Yeah.
That was what I took away.
Yes, for me, I absolutely. I think, art and love, they're the big things. They're the two pillars.
Well, that is a good place to end. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you.
Before we let you go, we'd love to have you read an excerpt
Sure.
from Why Be Happy If You Could Be Normal.
Yeah.
And I had marked one for you, and I just need to find it. Oh, here we go.
Okay. Oh, so this is about leaving.
It is.
Yeah. The night I left home, I felt I'd been tricked or trapped into going, and not even by Mrs. Winterson, but by the dark narrative of our life together. Her fatalism was so powerful. She was her own black hole that pulled in all of the light. She was made of dark matter, and her force was invisible, unseen, except in its effects. What would it have meant to be happy? What would it have meant if things had been bright and clear and good between us? It was never a question of biology or nature versus nurture. I know now that we heal up through being loved and through loving others. We don't heal by forming a secret society of one, by obsessing about the only other one that we might admit, and then being doomed to disappointment. Mrs. Winterson was her own secret society, and she longed for me to join her there. It was a compulsive doctrine, and I carried it forward in my own life for a long time. It is, of course, the basis of romantic love, you plus me against the world, a world where there are only two of us, a world that doesn't really exist except that we are in it, and when one of us fails the other, and one of us will always fail the other. When I walked away that night, I was longing for love and for loyalty. The wide yearning of my nature had to funnel through a narrow neck. It went into that idea of the other, the almost twin, who would be so near to me, but not me, a Plato-like split of a complete being. We'd find each other one day, and then everything would be all right, wouldn't it? I had to believe that. How else would I have coped? And yet I was heading for the dangerous losses that all or nothing love demands of us. But, and this really matters, you don't really have much choice when you're 16. You leave with your inheritance. But there's always a wild card. And what I had were the books. And what I had most of all was the language that books allowed. A way to talk about complexity. A way to say, as the poet Coleridge did, to keep the heart awake to love and beauty.
Thank you very much.